I've refused to listen to any YouTuber talk about free speech because at a certain point I become to realize they're so wrong that it just makes me cringe. Here's just one thing that people say all the time online that's blatantly BS. And it's quite simple and fast to see that it's easily BS, yet people won't stop saying it. Here it is. Freedom of speech doesn't mean freedom from consequences. And that's the first thing they say. Well, the Soviets could say the same thing. We let you say what you want, but the consequences are being sent to the gulag. Freedom of speech doesn't mean freedom from consequences. The Nazis could have said the same thing. We let you say what you want, but the consequences are being sent to a concentration camp. Freedom of speech doesn't mean freedom of consequences. So the statement is flatly BS. Freedom of speech does mean freedom from some specific consequences by definition. And answer me this, if freedom of speech doesn't mean freedom of certain consequences, then what the heck does it mean? What the heck is it? Now, you might say maybe I'm just perhaps making a straw man argument, and that I'm trying to defeat a straw man argument, and that the statement is not meant to be taken completely literally. The better version of the statement is that freedom of speech doesn't mean freedom from social consequences. So they're talking specifically about social consequences. But even that is erroneous. And the problem is with that statement is that it conflates the First Amendment with the general concept of free speech. Free speech and the First Amendment are not the same thing. Freedom of speech means freedom to say whatever you want, to say your opinion, and to be free from consequences. The First Amendment is a law, part of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, that says that the government cannot infringe on your free speech. So it does have to do with free speech. But the First Amendment is not free speech, and free speech should not be limited to the First Amendment. Now, I'm one of the people who steadfastly calls myself a free speech absolutist, but I should point out a subtlety in that when I call myself a free speech absolutist, that's a bit of a misnomer. It's more accurate to say that I'm a First Amendment absolutist. That is to say, I think that the application of the First Amendment should be absolute. But I readily accept that some subtle infringements on the principle of free speech are to be accepted. For example, let's say you badmouth your boss and your boss fires you. Or let's say you badmouth your wife and your wife divorces you. Okay, maybe you'd have to badmouth your wife a lot before it gets to divorce. But I am strict enough that I would call that a free speech violation, but I accept that's okay. That's to be expected and accepted. Okay, but having said that, does that mean that I don't have a problem with any no free speech violations? I only have a problem with First Amendment violations, and I don't care if it's a non-governmental free speech violation. I'm completely permissive. No, there are some violations of free speech that are not governmental, that they do not fall under the First Amendment. However, I do still have a problem with them. And in those cases, I will call it censorship, and that's how I'll use the word censorship. And I'm not necessarily advocating that all censorship be illegal. Of course, governmental censorship can and should be illegal. That's the First Amendment. But I will criticize censorship from non governmental entities, from social media companies, for example, and that's what I'm going to get into. So, some cases of free speech violations I might think should be legal, but I will still dislike and I'll criticize and call it censorship. So, most of the time, blatantly politically biased censorship is bad PR. So, social media organizations will allow most speech. But every now and then, a social media company will do a risk reward calculation and decide that censorship, particularly when it aligns with the site runner's own biases, they'll decide that it's good for business. And when that happens, invariably this comment will be heralded. People will say, they are a private company, so they can do what they want. If you don't like it, go somewhere else. They don't have to give you a platform. And so, obviously, there are many people on the left who make this argument. That's where the term no non-platforming comes from. Non-platforming, they say, is not censorship because technically they can still say what they want. They want. You just don't give them a platform. So that's the whole root of that ideology. But also, there are people on the right who say this. People on the right who are getting really duped and getting really fooled and just blindsided by their own ideology. I'm talking about like conservatives like Ben Shapiro or these Christian types of people who really fall for this. They'll fall for the idea that if you're a private company, then you can do what you want. You can censor all that you want, and that's perfectly fine. Well, this argument is simultaneously both insightful and idiotic on several levels. To begin with, does this mean to suggest that I cannot use my free speech to criticize the action of a corporation that I find objectionable when they censor someone? I can't use my free speech to object to it? Well, here's a more important part. Here's an often a very another oft heard rebuttal, but it's worded crudely. Here's how it goes. It says these social media companies are monopolies. They should be regulated as such and treated not as ordinary companies because they are monopolies. And I hear this argument all the time. And I kind of like this argument because it points in a good direction. But it's still, well, it's not fully wrong per se, but this argument is virtually always made poorly, made by people who do not have an understanding of economics and who just reacting based on instinct and aren't really thinking about why or how these companies are monopolies. Now, argument is very important, but the point of contention here is not that the social media companies, Facebook, YouTube, are monopolies per se. The particular problem I have, and I'll attempt to make a good version of this argument, the problem I have is why they are monopolies. And it's not because of government involvement. The thing that is more important to take into account is network externalities, sometimes called network effects. These are not just an afterthought, not just another thing to be added on to the end of the equation. They are the single quintessentially most important thing, most important reason to explain why almost everything on the modern internet works the way it does. The internet didn't always work based on network effects, but now it is completely defined by them. A network effect, as defined by Wikipedia, is, quote, the value an additional user of a good or service has on the value of that product for others. In other words, the fact that people are using that product or service creates value for that good or service. This isn't true of like a candy bar. If I eat a candy bar, then the value of that candy bar is gone. But this is true of, well, we'll see. The fact that the service is popular is what helps it stay popular. So it's a feedback loop where you can only become popular by being popular, and you can only be popular by becoming popular. Some people call this the chicken and the egg problem, but I think that's a really stupid term for it because it's pretty obvious what came first, but some people call it that. So, in sites like YouTube and other social media for that matter, the content is created by the users themselves. This is practically the definition of a social network. In Facebook, the people who create the posts on Facebook are also the people who go to Facebook to read the posts. In Twitter, the people who tweet are the same people who go to Twitter to read the tweets. The Twitter company doesn't put out the tweets, the user creates the content. So, in those cases, the social network is really a platform for value to be created by the users, which people go to the platform to get, which the platform capitalizes on. And that's what sets a social network, perhaps better called a social platform, apart from other goods and services. A video hosting site is not like a toothbrush company where I buy my toothbrush by the same company that made the toothbrush. And when I go online, there aren't any popular video hosting options besides YouTube. If I want to post a video, yes, I can go to BitChute or some other bullshit video hosting platforms. I'll get into the alternatives in a moment. But basically, you only have YouTube. And this is also kind of a pet peeve for me that people talk about banning content from YouTube as if it is somehow separate from deranking it in the algorithm. Of course, when someone gets banned, you can see they got banned, it's a big deal. But I would argue if something gets deranked in the algorithms and suggested less, let's say previously you were getting suggested X number of times, and then because of the algorithm changes, it devalues your content, so you get recommended half as much. I would consider that halfway to a ban. If you get recommended half as much, that's halfway to a ban. And if your content gets put on limited state, make no mistake, that is a ban. You might technically be able to find the content with a link, but then what's the point of even hosting it on YouTube in the first place? You might as well host it on VidMe or BitChute or whatever. The whole point of hosting it on YouTube is that there is an audience on YouTube. The recommended tab is the whole reason to post on YouTube. That's the point. You post it on YouTube because that's where the audience is. No, it's a catch-22. The audience is there because the creators are there. The creators are there because the audience is there, and that is a network effect that all social networks benefit from. And there's no getting around that. People say, you don't like how YouTube demonetizes its content creators? Then just create your own video hosting service. So, I will come right out and say it. There will never, ever be ongoing large-scale competition between YouTube and another similar video hosting site. And I'll take a step further. There will never, ever be large-scale ongoing competition between Facebook and another similar social networking site. And I do not mean to suggest that YouTube will not be replaced at some theoretical point. YouTube might be replaced at some theoretical point. After all, MySpace was replaced by Facebook. I'm only saying that two widely used video hosting sites will not exist simultaneously at the same time. There might be 2 or 3 niche hosting sites like Vimeo for, art films, or LiveLeak for content that's too violent for YouTube, or certain platforms that cater to more controversial people, that sort of thing. There will be niche social networking video hosting sites, but there will not be YouTube. There will only be one YouTube. So is this a bold statement? Well, let's look at the list of network effects that YouTube benefits from. When you type something in the YouTube search bar, you expect something to show up, right? You expect the YouTube search bar to work, right? Well, that is only possible because YouTube has a gigantic catalog of videos, so big that if you search for anything in the YouTube search bar, something will come up. It doesn't matter what you search for, but that is only possible because YouTube is popular. A new YouTube hosting platform will not have that benefit. Let's list another one. When you watch a video on YouTube, suggested videos will appear on the sidebar. This is, again, only possible because YouTube has a gigantic catalog of videos so that it can show you similar videos to what you just watched. Also, it knows enough about you that it can, and enough about user preferences in general, that if you like a bunch of things, it can look at a bunch of other people who like similar things to you and suggest what those other people like. So it has built up an enormous catalog of data about the people, about people's preferences, so that it can find videos specifically tailored to you, no matter who you are. Not only does it benefit from a gigantic catalog, but they benefit from all the data they have amassed about people and the trends and that sort of thing. So in order to have users, you need to get users. But in order to get users, you need to have users. And of course, the biggest network effect is that the audience goes there because the content creators are there. The YouTubers go there because the audience is there. So to go to a different platform, the audience and the creators would both need to move over simultaneously, which isn't going to happen. It's a coordination problem. It's a prisoner's dilemma collective action problem. The same principles are at play at any other social network, like Facebook. People use Facebook because their friends are on Facebook. If their friends weren't on Facebook, people wouldn't be using Facebook.